Upon my return to Earth, I did not give myself over to fear while facing the lonely, eternal night of the dark side of the moon. Yet I was obviously aware of the vast and intimidating unknown that surrounded me. Michael Collins. Michael Collins, the third astronaut on the Apollo 11 mission, was the first person to ever see the far side of the moon. Wild rumors still surround what Collins actually saw during his lonely flight around the Earth's satellite. Collins himself has made some remarkable statements about his discoveries, which many believe leave room for speculation. What did Collins really experience during his flight, and how did the astronaut deal with this lonely experience after the mission? We shed light on this and reveal all the facts now. The historical significance of the Apollo 11 mission. The Apollo 11 mission marked an unforgettable moment in human history. When the Saturn V rocket took off on July 16, 1969, it was not only a technical masterpiece on its way to space, but also a symbol of human courage and exploration. Millions of people around the world cheered in front of their television screens as Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon just ahead of his colleague, Buzz Aldrin, declaring, "This is one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." On that day, a new chapter in space travel was opened. The success of the mission was ultimately also the result of an intense race between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War. Both superpowers wanted to demonstrate their technological and scientific superiority and conquer space. The successful US moon landing was therefore not only a scientific triumph, but also a significant geopolitical statement and gave the US renewed self-confidence. The fact that the Russians had put the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin, tore a painful wound into the nation's spirit. When Americans were the first to set foot on the moon, this disgrace was not forgotten. Armstrong and Aldrin stayed on the moon for only a few hours, collecting a total of 21.5 kilograms of rock and lunar dust, revolutionizing our understanding of the moon and leaving behind some devotional objects such as a plaque commemorating the deceased astronauts of the Apollo 1 mission, a plaque commemorating the visit of the first men to the moon, and of course, the US flag. Groundbreaking at that time were not only the impressions of the moon itself, but the views of how actually our Earth looks from space and from the moon. Our world became a beautiful blue dot floating through a dark space. With all the heroic deeds and milestones, as well as the jubilation surrounding Armstrong and Aldrin, one aspect of the moon landing was somehow always forgotten. This was true as early as the 1960s and has hardly changed to this day. This circumstance is basically the one man who is known as the forgotten astronaut to only a few space fans to this day. Michael Collins was the third astronaut of Apollo 11, who, however, did not land on the moon, but stayed in the space shuttle and circled the moon several times, while Armstrong and Aldrin explored the moon itself. Michael Collins, the forgotten astronaut. Michael Collins had a no less important task during the mission. His job was to control the command module that all three astronauts had used to fly to the moon. During the lunar walk, the experienced pilot continued to navigate the spacecraft in lunar orbit and waited for his two colleagues to return. Collins had to ensure that the Columbia module remained in a stable orbit and was ready to pick up the lunar landing module upon its return from the lunar surface. During his orbits around the moon, Collins traversed the dark side of the moon, where he was cut off from all communication with Earth for about 48 minutes per orbit. During this time, Collins was the loneliest person in the universe, farther from Earth than any other human being before and completely on his own. He later described these moments as mostly quiet and peaceful, not lonely or isolating. One of the most critical maneuvers Collins had to perform was rendezvousing and docking with the lunar landing module after Armstrong and Aldrin completed their historic lunar landing. A mistake here would have had catastrophic consequences and possibly stranded Armstrong and Aldrin on the moon. But Collins executed the maneuver with precision and skill. Although Collins had never received the attention that his colleagues had, he was proud of his role and understood the importance of his duties to the success of the mission. The press, on the other hand, stylized Collins as the overlooked hero of spaceflight history. The astronauts of the Apollo 11 mission. Thanks to the moon landing, they were truly heroes, but hardly anyone actually knows who Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins were in real life. Neil Armstrong grew up in a small town in Ohio. Even as a boy, he was fascinated by the sky, and by the age of 16, he had a pilot's license. Armstrong could fly before he could drive a car, and this passion naturally brought him to the Navy. After serving as a naval pilot in the Korean War, he became a test pilot and flew some of the fastest and most dangerous aircraft in the world. After the war, he went straight into NASA's space programs and, thanks to his calm and level-headed nature, was the desired candidate to command the lunar flight. Compared to Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin was a more energetic and charismatic man. Born in New Jersey into a military family, Aldrin seemed destined for the skies. He was not only a brilliant engineer, but also a gifted fighter pilot. During the lunar landing, it was his job to guide the Eagle landing module safely to the lunar soil. Michael Collins was born in Italy when his father served as a military attaché in the Italian capital. After a childhood in Europe, Collins made his way to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and the third man of the Apollo 11 mission first became a test pilot. Together, these three men formed a team that was a perfect match not only for their professional excellence, but also for their unique life stories and personalities. After the moon landing, however, the three are said to have parted ways again. Aldrin and Armstrong still often appeared together on television, and Collins became something like the Phantom of the moon landing. Only in present time did the interest of the man who was the first to see the backside of the moon increase again, and for a very good reason. What did Michael Collins really see? The dark side of the moon, that part that never faces the Earth, has always captured people's imagination. When Michael Collins circled the moon alone, he was the very first person ever to see this side of the moon. In the present day, wild rumors of spaceships and relics of an extraterrestrial civilization swirl around the far side of the moon. During his orbits around the moon, Collins passed through the dark side twice for about 48 minutes. Collins described the landscape in his memoir as rugged and crater-strewn, from which emanated a strange but beautiful silence. I am alone now, really alone, and absolutely isolated from any known life. I am. If you were to count, the result would be 3 billion plus 2 on the other side of the moon, and 1 plus who knows what on this side. Michael Collins. Allegedly, UFO enthusiasts and para-researchers want to find hidden clues in confusing passages from Collins's book about what he really saw. Various images that have circulated the web for decades show formations on the far side of the moon that resemble giant spaceships or rocks that look like the remains of a building. What is the truth? It is a fact that today we have a lot of pictures of the backside of the moon by satellite images. Even ordinary internet users today can zoom into the released data at any time and explore the far side of the moon. The official pictures show no or hardly any proof for alien theories. But again and again, NASA insiders claim that this is all a big deception. The satellite images are allegedly censored and even elaborately retouched by hundreds of technicians and image editors. No hint of an alien power or the relics of spaceships or buildings are said to be visible. All references disappear before the pictures are made public. All astronauts who were on the moon and circled it like Collins are supposed to have received a speech prohibition on the part of the powerful ones of NASA after the flights. Allegedly, likewise censored radio recordings are to prove even that Armstrong and Aldrin saw on the moon spaceships. NASA denies such assertions vehemently, and thus it must remain further a mystery what really takes place on the averted side of the moon. Life after Apollo 11. After their return to Earth, the astronauts were questioned for almost a lifetime by journalists about extraterrestrials. Officially, they saw nothing, but again, there are dozens of reports that paint a different picture. Buzz Aldrin's sister is said to have admitted once to a journalist that her brother had been muzzled and suffered very much from it. Quotes from Armstrong are known, according to which he had indicated in private that he and his family were in danger when he talked about certain events of the moon landing. Armstrong tried to escape the hype surrounding him just 2 years after the moon landing by leaving NASA and becoming a professor of aeronautical engineering at the University of Cincinnati. He later promoted various space and education initiatives and sat on the board of several companies. Armstrong died in August 2012 at the age of 82 after complications from heart surgery. If he knew about aliens, he took that secret to his grave. Aldrin also left NASA in 1971 and tried his hand less successfully as commander of a U.S. Air Force test pilot school. The fact that the one-time hero struggled with alcoholism and depression further fueled speculation about a possible pressure and strange experiences during the moon flight. In his numerous books and memoirs, there are supposed to be several allusions to the problems with NASA and the pressure Aldrin had experienced during his experiences. Nevertheless, we can only continue to speculate here. Aldrin is the only Apollo 11 astronaut still alive. In 2023, he celebrated his 93rd birthday and even married his longtime companion. Michael Collins also retired from NASA shortly after Apollo 11 and all but disappeared from the scene. At first, he took a little-noticed public affairs post at the U.S. State Department. Later, he became director of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. His autobiography, Carrying the Fire, is considered one of the best astronaut memoirs because of its sensitive and insightful descriptions. Collins died in April 2021 at the age of 90. 3 men, 3 fates, and one thing in common. Although Collins seemed to have drawn the worst card on the mission, he was the first and one of the few people to actually see the mystery of the far side of the moon. But what do you think? Did Michael Collins really see things there about which he was not allowed to speak all his life? Or do you believe that the whole hype about aliens on the moon is completely exaggerated?